By the time Barbara Murphy reached the servants' stair, her breath had thinned to broken pools, and her left cheek still burned where Lady Murphy's ring had cut across it, quick, hard, and practised, as if striking another person were no more troublesome than ringing for tea. The house was bright above and shadowed below, as it always was at that hour. In the drawing-room, candles multiplied themselves in long mirrors, and gentlemen laughed over claret. In the passages behind the panelling, trays steamed, boots thudded, and maids kept their heads down. Barbara paused at the landing only long enough to lay one hand against the cool stone and steady herself before descending again. She knew better than to touch her face where it hurt. Marks darkened when fussed over. At 22 she was called, by some delicate fiction of rank, Lady Murphy's companion. In plain language, she was a dependent, paid to be useful and invisible in the very Hampshire house her father had once called hers. Guests who had known him would occasionally look at her with mild surprise, as if trying to reconcile Mr. Murphy's clever eldest daughter with the quiet young woman in untrimmed muslin and serviceable shoes. More often they did not look at all. If they spoke of her, it was to describe her as tolerable, plain, subdued. No one remarked upon her hands, ink-stained and capable, or her dark eyes that missed very little and gave away less. Humiliation, endured daily, had a rhythm to it. Barbara had learned to live by rhythm. She rose early enough to read correspondence before breakfast, copied household accounts in a scholar's neat, slanted hand her father had taught her by the nursery fire, and performed whatever small tasks kept tempers smooth, music after dinner, card tables set out, shawls fetched, names remembered. At night she wrote figures by candlelight for no one's praise. With her own thin stipend, she bought no ribbons and no scent. Last week she had spent nearly all of it on broth bones and willow bark for Elsie in the kitchen, whose fever had turned her eyes glassy and whose mother was 2 counties away. Lady Murphy had called it sentimental nonsense. Barbara had called it supper and left the bowl by the girl's cot. Rain had been hammering the windows since late afternoon, fat spring rain driven nearly sideways by the wind. The long drive shone black under carriage lamps as guests arrived for supper in a procession of wheels and cloaks. Silver needed polishing twice because of the damp. Rugs had to be changed in the front hall. By 7 the household had gathered itself into the brittle cheer required for entertaining. Barbara had nearly convinced herself she might pass the evening in peace when Lady Murphy's maid found her in the small morning room off the gallery, where she was sorting place cards. "Her ladyship requires you in the blue salon, immediately." The maid's eyes flicked once to Barbara's cheek and away. In the blue salon, a fire snapped low and decorative, more for appearance than heat. Lady Murphy stood before it in amethyst silk, one hand resting theatrically on the mantel. Beside her, with damp whiskers and a waistcoat strained over his middle, sat Mr. Selwyn Pike. He smelled faintly of expensive pomade and old tobacco, and the corners of his mouth tilted in a private satisfaction that made Barbara's spine go hard. 2 neighbouring matrons had been detained on transparently thin pretexts. So had the vicar's wife. Witnesses, then. "Barbara, dear," Lady Murphy said, sweetness lacquered over steel, "set down your tray. We have delightful news." Barbara did as told, though every instinct in her body warned her this was not a room in which to stand unguarded. "Mr. Pike," Lady Murphy continued, "has expressed the highest regard for your future security. In my affection for you, and with your best interests at heart, I have accepted his generous proposal. You shall be married at once. How fortunate that such protection should be offered to a girl with so little—" she paused, smiled. "Prospect," the matrons murmured. Mr. Pike rose halfway, enough to suggest dignity, if not agility, and bowed as though receiving applause. Barbara felt, absurdly, the grain of the tray beneath her fingertips. Walnut, recently waxed. The silver on it trembled once, then stilled. For a moment the room sharpened to tiny details. Rain ticking at the panes, the hiss of a log collapsing inward, Lady Murphy's ring catching firelight as she lifted a hand to adjust a curl. "You will, of course, thank your mother," said Lady Murphy. Stepmother, Barbara thought, and no. She did not argue. Argument gave cruelty a stage, and she had no intention of playing to this audience. Instead, she placed the tray with deliberate care upon the nearest side table. She dipped into a formal, perfectly measured curtsy before Lady Murphy, then Mr. Pike, then the witnesses. She lifted her head. Her face was expressionless except for 2 bright spots high in her cheeks that were not from rouge. "Excuse me," she said. No one moved quickly enough to stop her because no one believed she meant to leave. She crossed the room, then the side passage, then the back corridor that ran behind the family portraits, and down toward the service court. Her pulse beat in her throat, in her wrists, in the cut on her cheek. She took no cloak from the peg, no bonnet, no valise. She took nothing at all because taking looked like planning, and planning could be intercepted. A woman seen with empty hands might still be dismissed as emotional. A woman with luggage was hunted. The back door slammed open under the force of the wind. Rain hit her at once, cold and hard enough to sting. In 3 steps her sleeves were soaked through. Gravel shifted beneath thin soles as she crossed the yard toward the stable arch, where lantern lights swung in yellow circles and horses snorted steam into the wet dark. She nearly walked directly into a black gelding's shoulder, and the tall rider bringing him up short. "Miss Murphy!" The voice was deep, controlled, startled only at the edges. Lord Alistair Hawthorne, Duke of Mereford, sat his horse like a man born to command animals and men with equal economy. Rain slid from the brim of his hat. He had only just arrived. A groom stood behind him, with the Duke's travelling chest still in hand, staring between them, as if uncertain whether to bow or disappear. Barbara did neither. She angled past the horse's neck with a muttered apology she did not hear herself make, and kept walking. "Miss Murphy!" Louder now. "You have no cloak." She did not stop. Most men of his rank, she knew, would have called a servant to retrieve her, and thought the matter concluded. The Duke was known, if anything, for an almost mathematical adherence to propriety. He mediated boundary disputes between tenants with brisk fairness. He donated to hospitals without ever staying to be thanked. He was never seen in scenes. He did not involve himself in domestic quarrels not his own. Barbara heard, over rain and wind, the soft thud of boots striking mud behind her. At the gate, where the lane bent toward the lower road, she turned at last, chest heaving, hair plastered to her temples, water streaming from her lashes. The Duke had handed off his reins. Somewhere behind him the groom had retreated with the gelding to shelter. Alistair Hawthorne stood in the rain without hat now, his dark hair wet, coat already ruined at the shoulders, looking at her not with curiosity, but with concentrated attention. "Do not attempt to return me," she said, each word clipped clean. "I would sooner drown in a ditch than be bartered to that man." Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the copse, turning the lane white for a heartbeat. The Duke did not flinch. "I have no intention of returning you." Silence stretched, full of water and wind. "Lady Murphy has announced your engagement to Pike?" he asked. "She has announced a debt settlement," Barbara said. "The terms include my person." A muscle moved once in his jaw. "Were you consulted?" "Only after the witnesses were assembled." His gaze shifted briefly toward the dark bulk of Murphy House, then back to her. When he spoke again, his voice was very even. You cannot remain on the road tonight. Not in this weather, and not with every posting in within 10 miles eager to report on anyone attached to that house." "I am aware," she said. Pride was a poor blanket, but it was the one she had. "I ask no favour." "Then take one offered, not asked." He paused as if selecting each word from a narrow shelf. "My aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Merriford, is in Bath. Her household requires a companion. You may go to her under my escort this evening and remain there in safety until you decide your next course." Safety! The word rang through her like something remembered from childhood, and therefore suspect. "You would take a stranger into your family." "You are not a stranger. I have known your father's name since before I inherited mine." He held her gaze. "And I am not offering shelter in exchange for obedience, gratitude, or silence. Merely shelter." The rain softened by degrees, from pounding sheets to relentless drizzle. Barbara became aware of how cold she was. Her hands had begun to shake, though she clasped them hard to hide it. "If I accept," she said, "Lady Murphy will call it abduction, or seduction, or madness, according to what sells best by breakfast." "She may call it what she pleases," he replied. "I shall call it escort." The answer should have reassured her. Instead, it stripped away the last useful excuse for refusing. Behind them, up at the stable arch, voices rose faintly, servants searching, perhaps already sent to fetch her. In an hour, if she stayed near enough to be found, Lady Murphy would perform maternal distress to anyone with ears. By morning there would be letters. By afternoon there would be speculation. A woman without fortune, husband, or sanctioned male protection moved through the world on sufferance. One whisper could cost her every door she might knock upon. If she were forced back, there would be no second dramatic announcement. There would be papers put before her in private, signatures demanded, perhaps the vicar summoned before she had drawn a full breath. Mr. Pike's hand would close over her future like a trap. And if she vanished alone, inns asked questions. Constables asked more. A solitary gentlewoman on the road in stormlight was taken for prey, liar, or lunatic by turns. She had a few coins sewn into her hem, and no legal certainty she understood well enough to wield. Lady Murphy controlled the household narrative, the correspondence, the servant's testimony. She could accuse Barbara of theft by sunrise and have half Hampshire repeating it by noon. No one defended women called ungrateful. No one listened long to women called unstable. The Duke, standing rain-soaked in the lane, was not salvation. He was simply the first solid fact that had appeared all evening. Barbara drew one slow breath. "Your Grace," she said, and this time there was no cut in her tone, only exhaustion held upright by will. "If I come under your aunt's roof, I come as a working woman, not as an object of pity." "Understood. And if I am asked to return, you will answer for yourself." That, more than anything, decided her. He inclined his head once, not triumph, not relief, acknowledgement. "My carriage is still on the drive. We will take the lower road to avoid the front." They walked back through the rain side by side, not touching. At the stable yard the groom stared, then looked sharply away as the Duke gave clipped instructions. Fresh horses, no delay, no message left behind. Barbara climbed into the carriage with soaked skirts clinging to her calves and muddy hems marking the step. Her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat. Her future, an hour ago arranged for her like a place card at supper, had blown loose into darkness. As the wheels jolted over wet gravel and turned away from Murphy House, she did not look back. In the seat opposite, Alistair Hawthorne removed his gloves, wrung water from them, and set them aside with precise care, as though order could be imposed on any storm if one began with small things. He did not speak, neither did she. Yet the silence between them was no longer the silence of submission. It was the narrow, dangerous space in which a life might be reclaimed or destroyed by what came next. For several miles the only sound was rain drumming the carriage roof and the measured clatter of wheels through ruts filling with water. At last the Duke reached to the side, drew a folded travelling rug from beneath the opposite bench, and set it on the cushion near her knees without comment. Barbara hesitated a fraction, then took it and wrapped it around her shoulders. Wet wool and leather and the faint clean scent of starch rose from it. "Thank you," she said. He inclined his head. "We change horses at Alton. After that, we keep to the turnpike until daybreak." "You had intended Bath tonight regardless?" "No, but I intend it now." She watched him in the intermittent lantern light, the severe line of his mouth, the way his hands rested still unless required, the complete absence of any demand that she explain herself in tears. She had never trusted men who asked women to perform suffering so they might feel noble for witnessing it. At Alton, the inn-yard was bright with torchlight and steam. Stable lads shouted. A hostler ran out, half-bowed, then straightened when he recognised the crest and began tripping over titles. The Duke stepped down first, turned and offered his hand as one might offer assistance to any lady descending in poor weather, neither over-familiar nor ostentatiously distant. Barbara placed her fingers in his and stepped onto slick stone. Inside the private parlour he requested hot tea, dry bread, and no visitors. He removed his signet ring, pressed it into red wax on a hastily written note, and sent it by express rider ahead to Bath. "For my aunt," he said, when he caught Barbara watching, "so that she is not surprised into alarm by the hour." Alarm! Not scandal, not inconvenience. She sat very straight in a high-backed chair while a maid, summoned from somewhere upstairs, brought a basin and asked in a whisper whether she might fetch liniment for the lady's face. Barbara almost said no from habit. Then she remembered she was no longer in Murphy House. "Yes," she said, "please." By dawn the rain had thinned to mist. The countryside lay washed and grey-green beyond the carriage glass, hedges dripping, fields smoking in pale light. Barbara had not slept. Neither, she thought, had the Duke. They entered Bath as morning bells were sounding, wheels echoing over stone. Merriford House stood on a broad street of pale terraces, its black railings newly wet, windows catching a weak sun. A butler with silver hair and a military spine opened before the knock fully landed. "Your Grace," he said, eyes flicking once to Barbara's soaked hem, and then politely nowhere. "Her Grace is in the yellow drawing-room. She has been waiting." The Dowager Duchess of Merriford rose from a settee as they entered. She was small, upright, wrapped in dove-grey cashmere with a cap trimmed in severe lace, and had the gaze of a woman who had buried both nonsense and fear long ago. "Alistair," she said first. Then to Barbara she came forward and took her chilled hands between warm, dry ones. "Miss Murphy, you are welcome in this house. Breakfast presently, sleep immediately, and explanations only when useful." Something in Barbara's chest, clenched since the blue salon, loosened enough to hurt. The first week passed in ordered quiet. Barbara was given a bedchamber on the 3rd floor overlooking the mews, 2 plain gowns altered from the Dowager's stores until her own could be made, and duties that were real enough to preserve dignity. Reading correspondence aloud after luncheon, arranging callers, keeping account of charitable disbursements, and accompanying the Dowager on morning visits. It was work she understood. Numbers steadied her. Routine stitched hours together that might otherwise fray. The Duke remained unfailingly courteous and almost entirely formal. At breakfast, when their paths crossed, he asked if she had slept, whether she required books from his library. whether the carriage had arrived for his aunt's rounds. He never asked what had happened in the blue salon beyond what she had already told him in the rain. He never spoke Lady Murphy's name unless practical necessity required it. At first, Barbara mistook that reserve for indifference. By the 10th day, she recognised it as discipline, perhaps kindness in a form he knew how to manage. Outside Merriford House, however, the world did not keep similar discipline. Lady Murphy's letters travelled faster than truth. By the second post came one addressed to the Dowager Duchess, in a hand trembling theatrically across expensive paper, lamenting a distressed and unbalanced girl who had fled in a hysterical fit after unfounded accusations against a most honourable suitor. 2 days later came another to a mutual acquaintance, conveniently shown to half a tea table before being reluctantly repeated within Barbara's hearing. Barbara had taken family jewels. Barbara had always been unstable. Barbara had been led astray by romantic novels and dangerous modern ideas. The Dowager read each new absurdity, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the fire with tongs, as if disposing of spoiled fish. Yet rumours, once lit, did what brush fire does. At the pump room one morning, a lady with ostrich plumes smiled at Barbara and asked, in tones of false sympathy, whether she found Bath's waters calming to the nerves. Another inquired whether that unfortunate misunderstanding about trinkets had been resolved. Barbara answered each with immaculate politeness and no information at all. She kept her back straight and her voice level until she and the Dowager were alone again in the carriage. "They want spectacle," the Dowager said dryly, watching her over-folded gloves. "I know," Barbara said. "I am trying not to provide one." "Continue," the Duke heard more than he repeated. Once, after dinner, Barbara entered the library to return a volume of Plutarch and found him at the writing table with 3 opened letters before him, jaw set in that rigid line she had come to recognise as anger under lock. He stood when she entered, as propriety demanded, and asked only whether his aunt was comfortable after her outing. When she said yes, he nodded and said good evening. She wanted absurdly to shake him and ask if he felt nothing. Instead, she returned Plutarch and left with the sensation of knocking against iron. The weather turned clear and deceptively mild. Bath filled with chairs and parasols, and gossip carried like lace fans from one square to another. It happened near Queen Square just past noon. Barbara and the Dowager had just left a milliner's when a pair of bays bolted at the crack of a dropped crate, sending a light hired carriage skidding hard on loose gravel. One wheel struck the curb. The carriage lurched, tipped, and went over with a splintering crash that split the street's easy hum into screams. For one frozen heartbeat, gentlemen shouted orders no one obeyed. Barbara was running before she knew she had moved. "Stay with me," she told the Dowager over her shoulder, then was in the mud at the carriage side, skirts soaking through at once. A boy of perhaps 7 had been flung half out, his arm gashed open from wrist to elbow where glass had bitten deep. Blood sheeted down his sleeve, bright and alarming. His mother, pinned awkwardly, was trying to reach him and crying his name in short animal sounds. "Look at me," Barbara said to the child, and when he did, wild-eyed, she put her hand behind his neck and made her voice hard with certainty she did not entirely feel. "You are not to faint. Do you hear me? You and I are going to count backward from 20 while I tie this." She tore a strip from her petticoat hem with both hands, twisted it into a band, and wrapped above the worst of the cut, tightening until the flow slowed. 19, she said. 18. Good. Keep speaking. A footman had finally found his limbs. She pointed. You, fetch a surgeon. Not tomorrow now. A tradesman stepped near, pale. Shouldn't we wait for... No, She shoved broken glass aside with the back of her wrist. "Lift the frame on my count. Gently. If you drop it, you answer to me." They obeyed. By the time the surgeon's apprentice came running, Barbara had the boy's bleeding contained and his mother freed with no obvious break. Her hands were red to the cuffs. Mud streaked her cheek. Her bonnet hung by one ribbon. When she rose, slightly dizzy, she found the Duke at the edge of the crowd, having come from the opposite pavement, hat in hand, expression shuttered and intent. He took in the scene once, then stepped to her. "Are you hurt?" "No." He looked at the makeshift bandage, the stunned apprentice, the child now whimpering but conscious, and said quietly, "Well done, Miss Murphy." Only that. No grand pronouncement. Yet around them the murmuring had changed its key. Not gone, never gone, but altered. By evening, 3 households had sent notes inquiring after the young lady from Merriford House who had such presence of mind. The same tongues that had repeated Lady Murphy's tales now attached new details. Barbara Murphy had tied off a child's artery with her own petticoat and frightened grown men into useful action. Rumour did not become justice, but it cracked. Mr. Selwyn Pike arrived on the 4th day after Queen Square at 5:30, with a solicitor, a silver-headed cane, and confidence thick as grease. The Dowager received him in the front drawing-room because refusing would only send him bragging into the street. Barbara stood beside the mantel. The Duke remained by the window, one hand behind his back, impassive as carved stone. Pike bowed with elaborate civility that did not touch his eyes. "Your Grace, what an honour! Miss Murphy, you look recovered from your little fit." "I was never unwell, Mr. Pike," Barbara said. The solicitor, a narrow man with parchment skin, opened a leather folio. "My client appears in good faith with documentation of Lady Murphy's consent to a marriage settlement and," he tapped another paper, "a special licence prepared in expectation of immediate regularisation. We are prepared to proceed quietly if Miss Murphy returns at once. Failing that, we are instructed to protect Mr. Pike's reputation by public clarification." "Clarification?" the Dowager repeated, as if tasting something sour. Pike spread his hands. "No one wished scandal. The girl is emotional. One overlooks it. But she has obligations." Barbara felt the old heat rise. Shame, fury, fear braided together. She heard rain in memory, felt the lane gate cold against her palm, and chose not to shake. "A contract purchased by coercion is not matrimony, sir," she said, each word landing cleanly in the room. "But trafficking!" Silence snapped taut. The solicitor blinked. Pike's face darkened mottled red above his collar. The Duke did not move, but something in the air around him sharpened. Pike gave a short, ugly laugh. "Big words for a dependent. You have no property, no protection, and very little name left to you. Do you imagine society will side with a disobedient girl against her mother and intended husband?" "My late father's records may answer that better than your imagination," Barbara said, surprising herself with the steadiness of it. Pike leaned forward. "Records can be made to say many things." "Indeed," said the Dowager, "which is why magistrates prefer originals. Mr. Pike, you may leave your papers. You may not leave your threats." He rose too quickly, cane striking the carpet with a dull thud. "This is not finished." "No," Barbara said, "it is not." After he and his solicitor were shown out, the drawing-room seemed to exhale. The Duke turned from the window at last. "You should have legal counsel beyond my household." "I know," Barbara said. Her pulse was still racing. "I also need facts, not merely indignation." "Then we begin with facts," he said. That night, after the house had quieted, Barbara sat in the Dowager's library with 2 candles, a pot of strong tea gone bitter, and 3 boxes of old estate correspondence the Dowager had ordered down from an attic press. "If your father kept private accounts," the Dowager had said, tapping the lid of the first box, "he would hide truth in plain sight. Clever men always do." Barbara untied ribbon after ribbon, rent rolls, inventories, steward letters, insurance notices, copies of settlements. Columns of figures marched across brown pages. Her eyes burned. Twice she thought she had found something, only to discover another dead end. An amended lease, a duplicated annuity. Nothing that altered the central problem that Lady Murphy had controlled narrative long enough to make lies respectable. Near midnight she drew out a misfiled ledger from between parish repair receipts and froze. The figures in the margin were ordinary until she looked at the 2nd and 4th columns together. Then the pattern snapped into recognition so abruptly she whispered aloud, her father's cipher, not a childish code but a disciplined merchant system he had taught her when she was 14, laughing that no clerk should ever be trusted with keys to both cash box and alphabet, shifted numerals, alternating substitutions, totals that concealed phrases when carried across selected lines. She had not seen it since his last winter, when illness had made his hand tremble, and he had insisted she learn it anyway. Hands suddenly unsteady, she turned pages, marking sequences, translating under her breath. Names surfaced, dates. Transfers routed through, holding accounts never disclosed in household summaries. Payments listed as improvements that corresponded to no repairs. Income from 2 parcels and a London investment diverted over 19 months into an account controlled solely by Lady Murphy's man of business. Then, tucked flat in the back board under pasted paper, she found a folded document bearing her father's seal, broken long ago and resealed badly. A codicil. She read it once. Then again, slower, because the first reading felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. It named Barbara Ann Murphy sole beneficiary of a trust funded at her father's death, principal and accrued income to be released in full upon her attaining 1 and 20. It noted, in explicit legal language, that guardianship authority over her person and property terminated at that same age. It appointed 2 trustees, 1 deceased, 1 apparently resigned, and required annual accounting to the beneficiary. Accounting never provided. Barbara sat back so abruptly the chair creaked. All this time Lady Murphy's power had been social force and procedural fog, not law. A floorboard sounded in the corridor. The Duke, coat thrown over evening clothes, appeared at the library door as if he had not meant to intrude and then decided to do so anyway. "I saw candlelight," he said. "Is anything wrong?" Barbara rose with the codicil in one hand and several copied figures in the other. "Everything is wrong," she said, breathless, "and for the first time it can be proven." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the documents only when she offered them. His eyes moved rapidly, then slowed as he reached the key clauses. She watched composure harden, crack, and reform into something colder and more dangerous than temper. "Guardianship ended last year," he said quietly. "Yes. And she continued to control your allowance, correspondence, and marriage negotiations as if you were still a minor?" "Yes." He looked up. "I suspected irregular accounts. I did not press because—" For once he stopped, searching for words like a man unused to admitting error. "Because I mistook your silence for acquiescence, not strategy." Barbara let out a breath she had been holding for years. It was often neither. It was survival. A shadow of pain crossed his face, brief and unhidden. "I'm sorry." The apology, plain and unadorned, struck deeper than any speech. She gathered the papers back, stacking them with care. "Sorry is useful only if it moves." "It will." He set his palm flat on the table, not touching her work. "Tell me where you mean to stand, Miss Murphy, and I will put every resource I possess behind that ground." She met his gaze over the candle flames and felt the axis of the story shift beneath her feet. No rescue, no private bargain. Evidence, witnesses, public light. "Not in drawing-room whispers," she said. "In a room where they cannot hush me." He nodded once. "Then we prepare for exactly that." "Then we prepare for exactly that." He did not leave her to it. Before the candles burned halfway down, the library table had become a campaign desk, parchment weighted by candlesticks, dates cross-listed, names ranked by usefulness and risk. The Duke wrote in a tight, economical hand to a Bath solicitor of unimpeachable reputation, to a retired steward once employed on the Murphy estate, and to a physician the Dowager trusted. Barbara copied extracts from the ciphered ledger until her fingers cramped, then copied them again so no single loss could ruin them. At 2 a.m, the Dowager appeared in her wrapper, took one look at their faces, and said, "If this is war, we shall at least have sandwiches." She rang for food as if provisioning troops. By dawn, they had a plan. Authenticate the codicil, secure sworn statements on diverted income, establish evidence of physical coercion, and force proceedings into a venue too public to manipulate quietly. By noon, Lady Murphy had answered with a counterattack swift enough to make Barbara's skin go cold. A notice appeared in circulation among Bath callers, ostensibly private, effectively universal, expressing grave maternal concern for Miss Barbara Murphy, who had allegedly suffered episodes of agitation and delusion, absconded with items of sentimental and monetary value, and fallen under the influence of interested parties. By afternoon, a second paper reached Merriford House from Pike's solicitor, formal demand for Barbara's return, allegation of theft of specified jewels, warning of immediate criminal complaint, and insinuation, carefully phrased, unmistakable in meaning, that the Duke of Merriford had compromised a gentlewoman under his protection. Barbara read it standing at the drawing-room escritoire while the Dowager watched her over spectacles. If the accusation stuck, everything she had begun to rebuild would collapse at once. No schoolroom, no independent lease, no trust restored, only the label thief, and all doors shut to it. If scandal attached to the Duke, she would be cast as schemer, seductress, social climber, whichever lie proved most entertaining. "Let them come," she said, but her throat felt tight around the words. The Dowager tapped the paper. "This is not merely temper. This is strategy. They mean to shift the question from fraud to your character." "They always have," Barbara said. That evening brought another blow. The retired Murphy steward, Mr. Hales, 60th a day, stiff-kneed but lucid, sent a note by boy. "Cannot attend tomorrow. Called upon by gentlemen on Lady Murphy's business. Much pressure. Will attempt Sunday. Burn this." The Duke read it once and held it over the fire until only black curls remained. "They are leaning on witnesses," he said. "Yes." He met her gaze. "And then we move faster than they do." They went next morning to Mr. Anstruther's chambers off Milsom Street, where law books climbed to the ceiling and dust motes turned in pale light above green baize tables. Anstruther himself was thin, exact, and allergic to drama. He reviewed the codicil, the ledger extracts, Barbara's age papers, and Lady Murphy's demands, and his mouth flattened by degrees. "This is substantial," he said at last, "not yet decisive. We require testimony tying these diversions to instruction from Lady Murphy or her agent, and we require chain of custody for this codicil stronger than found in a misfiled volume. However credible Miss Murphy may be, I do not doubt you, madam. I prepare for those who will." He dispatched a clerk to bring in Hales at once for sworn statement. The clerk returned 40 minutes later, hat in hand, face pale. "Mr. Hales cannot come, sir." "Why not?" "He is dead." No one spoke. "Fell down his back stair in the night," the clerk said, swallowing. "Landlady says she heard voices earlier. Coroner has not sat yet." Barbara's fingers tightened on the edge of the table until the knuckles blanched. Hales had been the one man who had actually balanced those estate books while her father lived. He had seen transfers made, instructions carried, signatures routed. Dead was not absence. Dead was a locked door. Anstruther swore softly under his breath and crossed out 2 lines on his working sheet with one hard stroke. "We proceed," he said, because he was a man whose profession required proceeding through wreckage. "But this costs us." It cost them more by afternoon. At Guildhall, where Anstruther sought an interim order preventing any forced marriage action pending review of the trust, they were met by Pike's solicitor already present, all injured innocence and sharpened teeth. He laid before the magistrate Lady Murphy's complaint of theft and instability, 2 character notes from obliging acquaintances, and a declaration that the codicil was likely forged by persons unknown. He requested, in the name of preserving property and family peace, temporary sequestration of the disputed trust funds and compulsory appearance of Miss Murphy for examination on the theft allegation. Sequestration granted pending inquiry, not final, not fatal, but immediate. Barbara walked out into the square with the sealed order in her glove and felt, for one suspended instant, exactly as she had felt in the blue salon with the tray in her hands, reduced from person to object while men arranged terms around her. "My money frozen," she said flatly. "My word discounted. My witness dead." The Duke stood beside her on the pavement, hat brim shadowing his eyes. "Temporary orders can be broken." "By whom?" "The same room that granted them." "By better evidence than they had this morning." She laughed once, without a humour. "Evidence that just broke its neck on a staircase." He did not answer quickly, and that frightened her more than if he had offered instant reassurance. Back at Merriford House, a fresh letter waited. This one from the Bath physician who had examined Barbara's face on her first day in residence. Under pressure from parties who questioned his impartiality, he declined further involvement in any contentious matter. So even the bruise might not be admissible beyond private sympathy. By dinner, Barbara could neither eat nor sit still. The Dowager sent away the fish untouched and poured her a half-glass of Madeira she did not want. "I told myself facts would be enough," Barbara said, staring at the amber in her glass. "I told myself if I could prove one clean line of truth, the rest would follow. Instead, every line frays the moment we pull it." "You are not wrong about facts," the Dowager said. "You are merely discovering that facts must survive contact with people." After midnight, Barbara went back to the library alone and spread copies across the table again, searching for some missed key, some overlooked name. Candle wax spotted her cuff. Her eyes stung. At some point she lowered her forehead to her folded arms and let herself shake once, hard, silent, from exhaustion and rage and the sickening thought that perhaps Lady Murphy had been correct in only one regard. Perhaps resistance changed nothing but the manner of one's ruin. When she finally raised her head, a fresh coal had been laid on the fire. She had not heard anyone come in. Alistair found he could not keep still. He left the library before dawn, because staying there while Barbara bent over figures with that grim, desperate focus felt like watching someone hold a collapsing wall with bare hands. In his own study he shut the door, set both palms on the desk, and breathed until the room steadied. Failure had a taste, iron, old and immediate. He had known it at 19, standing outside his mother's dressing room, while his father's voice, lazy, amused, lethal, explained to a physician that her Grace was overwrought again, not herself, inclined to dramatic invention. Alistair had been young enough to believe outrage and title could correct cruelty if deployed forcefully enough. He had gone to war in the drawing-room, demanded explanations, threatened exposure. 2 weeks later, his mother had been removed to a rest establishment on signed recommendation for nervous imbalance. She died there before Michaelmas. No inquiry, no scandal, domestic privacy preserved. Since then he had trained himself into stillness, never act on feeling, never move without documentary ground, never enter another household's quarrel unless invited by law or blood. People called it coldness. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was armour welded directly to bone. And now Barbara sat 3 floors away, bearing marks he had seen with his own eyes, while another polished predator attempted the same old trick under newer language. Unstable girl, emotional excess, maternal concern. He had recognised the pattern on the lane in the rain, and still underestimated the speed with which it would close. A knock. His aunt entered without waiting. "You look like your grandfather before Waterloo dispatches," she said. "I should have moved sooner on the Murphy accounts months ago." "Yes," she said, unsoftened, "and I should have dismissed 3 poor musicians in 2008 before they emptied my cellar. Regret is accurate and useless in equal measure. What now?" He stared at the fire. "If I push too hard, I confirm every whisper that I am directing her for my own purposes. If you do nothing, she is buried politely." He gave a short breath that might have been a laugh in another man. "I do not know how to stand near her without either commanding or withdrawing." "Then try a third method. Tell the truth." Later he found Barbara in the conservatory passage, not reading, not writing, simply standing with one hand on the back of a chair as if relearning balance. Morning light made the old bruise shadow faint yellow along her cheekbone. "Miss Murphy," he said. She turned. "Your Grace." He hated the distance in it, and had earned it. "I owe you candour," he said. "Not because it improves strategy, because you deserve it." He paused, the old instinct to edit himself pressing hard. He did not obey it. "When I was young, someone in my family used the language of female instability to hide violence. I challenged it badly, and too late. The law protected the wrong people. Since then, I have made restraint into a virtue whether or not it fit the circumstance. In your case, that restraint became another form of abandonment." Barbara said nothing, but her hand tightened once on the chair back. "I cannot repair what happened before the lane," he continued. "I can choose what I do now. I will not decide for you. I will not leave you to fight alone." For a long moment she studied him with that unnerving directness of hers, as if weighing not charm or status, but structural integrity. "Thank you," she said finally, "for not dressing it up." He bowed his head once, the nearest he came to relief. "Anstruther has one possible opening. If we can compel testimony from someone presently in Lady Murphy's household, the sequestration order may crack." "Who?" "A maid dismissed last month. Name, Jane Elcott. She sent word through my aunt's housekeeper that she knows where account copies were kept and how messages to Pike were routed." Barbara's eyes sharpened. "Then we speak to Jane." "We attempt to," he said. "She is frightened and has moved twice in as many days. Fear, pressure, running." The pattern tightened again. By late afternoon they had arranged to meet Jane Elcott in a hired room above a baker's near Walcott, neutral ground chosen for anonymity. Barbara wore plain brown and no jewellery. The Duke came separately on foot, collar turned up, with only his valet at distance. Anstruther waited inside with ink, oath book, and a clerk ready to take deposition. Jane did not come. At first they told themselves delay, then a second quarter hour, then an hour. At last the baker's wife climbed the stairs, wringing her apron, and produced a folded scrap delivered by an errand boy. "Do not seek me. They know. They said, if I speak, my brother in service loses place and references, and worse. I am sorry. Burn this." Anstruther read it, jaw set. "No signature." "It's hers," Barbara said quietly. "The loop on the Y." "What did they offer?" the Duke asked. "It more likely what did they threaten?" Anstruther said. The answer arrived sooner than any of them wanted. As they descended to the street, 2 constables approached with formal stiffness and removed their hats. "Miss Barbara Murphy?" "Yes." "By complaint entered this day, we are to execute a lawful search at Merriford House for specified property alleged stolen from Lady Murphy's residence." Barbara felt the world narrow to the space between one breath and the next. The Duke stepped forward, voice level. "On what authority do you search a ducal residence?" The senior constable produced paper with seals. "Authority sufficient, Your Grace. We are instructed to conduct ourselves with respect." Respect looked like turning out drawers in a lady's chamber while servants stared fixedly at walls. Respect looked like gloved hands lifting folded chemises, opening workboxes, tapping seams. They found nothing in Barbara's trunks, nothing in her desk, nothing among her books. Then, from the deep pocket of a mending basket she had not touched since Tuesday, the junior constable drew a velvet pouch tied with green silk. Inside lay a pair of ruby earbobs and a small diamond brooch Barbara had seen Lady Murphy wear at Christmas. The room went utterly still. Barbara stared at the jewels in the constable's palm and felt nausea sweep up so fast she caught the bedpost to remain upright. Planted, every line of her mind shouted. Planted so neatly that saying so sounded like panic. "I have never seen that pouch," she said, and heard how thin it sounded against the visible glitter. The senior constable looked not unkind, merely procedural. "You may state that in full adhering tomorrow, miss." "Tomorrow," the Duke said. 10 o'clock, Guildhall Chamber." Anstruther, summoned at once, negotiated hard in the passage and extracted only this: no immediate arrest if surety were posted and Miss Murphy appeared as ordered. The Duke paid without blinking. When the constables left, taking inventory and jewels, the house felt violated down to the wallpaper. The Dowager dismissed all but essential staff and had her housekeeper lock the servants' hall accounts herself. "Someone had access," she said. "I will know who." Barbara sat in the library chair where she had found her father's cipher and pressed both hands flat on her knees until feeling returned. "If I walk into Guildhall tomorrow," she said, voice raw, "they will keep me answering theft while Pike marries some other lie to my name. Private room, closed door, selective listeners. They can bleed me out in procedures for months." Anstruther nodded grimly. "Quite possibly." The Duke stood by the mantel, eyes hard as cut glass. "Then we don't give them a private room." Barbara looked up. He met her gaze. "Devonshire Rooms Assembly, tonight. Half Bath present, including your accusers, their allies, and people who cannot later claim ignorance. You have documents, extracts, age papers, and my aunt's witness to your arrival condition. If you speak there, the narrative breaks open before they can seal it at Guildhall. Or I am laughed out before I finish a sentence." "Not if you do not tremble," the Dowager said, "and you do not." A footman appeared at the door, pale. "Beg pardon, Your Grace. There is a gentleman below asking whether Miss Murphy has selected a gown for this evening's assembly. He left a card." Anstruther took it, swore once, and handed it to Barbara. "Mr. Selwyn Pike." On the back, in a different hand, 10 o'clock is punctual. Do not make us fetch you. Barbara set the card down very carefully beside the codicil. Outside, evening rain began again, soft at first, then steadier, tapping the window panes like impatient knuckles. Outside, evening rain began again, soft at first, then steadier, tapping the window panes like impatient knuckles. Barbara stood, took the card between two fingers, and fed it to the nearest candle flame. It curled black and dropped in pieces into the tray. "Send for my plain grey silk," she said to the dowager's maid at the door. "No trim." The dowager's brows lifted once, approving. "And pearls." "No, ink." The Devonshire rooms were already bright when Merriford's carriage drew up, lamps flaring gold against wet stone, music leaking in threads through the open doors. Bath had turned out in force despite the weather. If anything, rain thickened attendance. There was nowhere better to be dry and watch scandal happen to someone else. Barbara paused one breath beneath the vestibule lantern while a footman took her damp shawl. Voices moved around her in ripples. "There she is. Thought she would hide. The Duke brought her himself." She did not look for Lady Murphy. She did not look for Pike. She walked into the assembly room on the dowager's arm, spine straight, her packet of papers held flat against her palm. The Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Beauchamp, was arranging the next set with the solemn concentration of a general positioning artillery. Barbara crossed to him before she could reconsider and spoke clearly enough that those nearest fell silent at once. "Mr. Beauchamp, I request the room's attention on a matter of fraud and coercion entered publicly against my name." His eyes widened. "Miss Murphy, this is highly irregular." "So is trafficking a woman under the appearance of marriage." The word struck like flint. A hush spread outward, uneven at first, then complete enough that the violins faltered mid-phrase and stopped. At the far side of the room, Lady Murphy froze with her fan half raised. Pike, beside the punch table, went very still, then set down his glass with exaggerated care. The Duke remained near a column, not beside Barbara, not claiming her moment, watching. Mr. Beauchamp swallowed. "If you insist, madam, briefly." Barbara turned to face the room. "Many of you have heard that I am unstable, ungrateful, and a thief," she said. Her voice carried, steady and unornamented. "You have heard I fled my stepmother's protection in a fit of disordered temper and refused a respectable match out of caprice. Tonight I place before you documents proving that I am of full legal age, no longer under guardianship, and beneficiary of a trust from my father wrongfully withheld and diverted." Lady Murphy snapped her fan shut. "How dare you stage theatrics in public?" Barbara did not raise her voice. "I dare because private rooms have been used to silence me." A few heads turned. Someone murmured, "Let her speak." Barbara unfolded the first document. Codicil to Mr. Edmund Murphy's will, dated 12 years past, witnessed and sealed. Clause 4. Trust principal and accrued income released to Barbara Ann Murphy upon attaining 1 and 20. Clause 5. All guardianship authority ceases on that date. She handed the page to Mr. Beauchamp. "Please read the clauses aloud, sir. Your neutrality is useful." He blinked, then, perhaps understanding history had just climbed onto his dance card, lifted the page and read in a voice that shook only once. By the time he finished, the room's silence had changed from appetite to attention. Lady Murphy laughed sharply. "A forgery? Obvious. The girl has always had a gift for dramatics and numbers." "Then let us discuss numbers," Barbara said. She set 3 ledger sheets on the nearest card table, waiting corners with candle cups. "These are extracts from estate accounts in my father's cipher, one he taught me personally and which can be verified by any competent accountant. They show income from long acre parcels and London notes diverted through an intermediary account under instruction from Lady Murphy's office, then transferred in sums corresponding to Mr. Pike's gambling obligations. Pike moved then, pushing through two startled gentlemen. "You malicious little... Those papers are mine." He reached. Barbara had anticipated it. Before his fingers closed, she lifted the top packet and passed it behind her to Mr. Beauchamp with one swift motion. "Keep those, sir," she said. "You will hand them directly to the constable." Pike lunged again, this time toward her wrist. The Duke stepped forward at last, quick and silent, placing himself between them with no flourish, one hand catching Pike's forearm just above the cuff and stopping it as if arresting a machine. "Mr. Pike," he said very quietly, "stand down." For a second Pike strained, face blotched, then wrenched free and stumbled back, breathing hard. "You see," he shouted to the room, "compromised, coached, this entire display is a scheme to trap a gentleman." "A gentleman does not buy consent through debt," Barbara said, "nor plant accusations when refused." Lady Murphy turned instantly from outrage to tears, pressing lace to dry eyes. Poor child, delusions, always delusions. She struck herself when crossed. She steals, then invents persecutions. Ask anyone. "I ask for magistrates," Barbara cut in, "not sympathy. And I submit additional evidence. A physician's note made on my arrival at Merriford House recording contusion to left cheek consistent with ring impact within hours of departure from your residence." She produced the folded note. Even at distance, the physician's seal was visible. The doctor might refuse to stand beside her now. His ink still stood where it was written. A rustle passed through the crowd like wind through reeds. Two matrons who had witnessed the blue salon announcement looked suddenly fascinated by their gloves. Barbara faced the room full on, rain thudding beyond the tall windows. "I do not request rescue," she said. "I request record. Let every person here know that if proceedings begin tomorrow at Guildhall, they begin under public knowledge that coercion, financial diversion, and bodily intimidation are alleged with documentary support. If Lady Murphy and Mr. Pike deny it, they may do so under oath." She turned to a footman petrified near the doorway. "You, please fetch the nearest constable and ask him to attend at once. Tell him Miss Murphy requests chain of custody for legal documents." The footman jerked a bow and ran. Only then did Barbara allow herself to breathe. Her hands were cold. Her knees threatened treachery. She did not sit. Lady Murphy's tears vanished as abruptly as they had appeared. "You insolent creature!" she hissed, low enough for only nearby ears. "You think paper will save you? I can ruin you in every county." Barbara met her gaze. "You already tried." The constable arrived within minutes, damp cloak shedding droplets onto polished floorboards. It was the same senior man from the search. He took one look at the gathered faces and straightened. "What is this, then?" Barbara handed over copies, naming each item calmly: codicil extract, ledger pages, physician note, and written request that materials be logged unaltered before morning hearing. Pike barked a laugh. "Convenient performance." "Perhaps," said the constable dryly, tucking the packet inside his leather case, "but now it's an official one." When he asked who would give initial statements, Barbara stepped forward first. Not the Duke, not the Dowager. Barbara. Guildhall at 10 smelled of wet wool, sealing wax, and human impatience. The hearing chamber was fuller than usual, word of the previous night having flown faster than any formal summons. Pike sat with his solicitor at the petitioner's table, jaw set, cane propped against his knee. Lady Murphy wore dove blue and widow's dignity, as if attending a christening. Barbara took her place with Anstruther and a stack of orderly papers she had arranged before dawn. The magistrate, Mr. Penrith, peered over spectacles. "We are here first on theft allegation by Lady Murphy against Miss Barbara Murphy. Second on preliminary motions regarding disputed trust administration. Given public disturbance last evening, I advise restraint from all parties." Pike's solicitor rose smoothly. He repeated theft claims, highlighted jewels found in Barbara's chamber, attacked codicil provenance, and suggested agitation rendered her testimony unreliable. He had adapted overnight, leaning hard on procedure and appearing almost sorrowful to do so. Then he made his mistake. "As to finances," he said, lifting one hand, "there is no competent evidence tying my client, Mr. Pike, to any impropriety beyond ordinary private debts among acquaintances." Barbara leaned to Anstruther. "Now." Anstruther nodded and stood. "Your worship, Miss Murphy requests leave to address the accounting point directly. She prepared the extracts personally and can identify notational links this court will miss if read as ordinary columns." Penrith hesitated, looked at Barbara, and perhaps recalled the assembly witnesses, packed against the wall. "Proceed briefly." Barbara rose with a ledger copy and approached the evidence table. "My father employed a double-column cipher," she said. "If your clerk reads lines 42 and 44 together by alternating numerals, phrases emerge here." She indicated with a pencil. The clerk followed, brow furrowing. "R.E. pledged winter quarter." Next page, line 11, "R.E. redeemed S.P." R.E. in household notation denotes ruby earbobs. S.P. denotes Selwyn Pike. These entries date 3 months before my departure from Murphy House. Pike's solicitor scoffed. "Creative interpretation." "Not interpretation," Barbara said. "Corroborated transaction." Anstruther signalled to the rear door. A broad-shouldered man in a brown coat stepped forward, hat in both hands. "State your name," Penrith said. "Thomas Cutler, pawnbroker, Abbey Green." "Do you recognise these items?" Anstruther asked, producing detailed sketches made from constable inventory and an old household description Barbara had copied months earlier. Cutler squinted. "Aye, ladies' ruby drops with 1 screw replaced, and diamond spray brooch with a chip near hinge. Took 'em on pledge from Mr. Pike in December, redeemed by same gent 3 days ago. I've ticket ledger and signature mark, if court pleases." He held up his book. Pike went grey beneath the flush. Lady Murphy snapped, "Lies! Bought testimony!" Barbara turned toward her, voice still level. "If the jewels were pledged in December and redeemed 3 days ago by Mr. Pike, they were not stolen from your dressing table last week by me." A murmur broke restraint. Penrith banged for order. Pike surged to his feet. "This proves nothing except I assisted a family friend in temporary liquidity, perfectly respectable." "By planting redeemed jewels in another household to allege felony?" Anstruther asked. "I planted nothing." "Then how came they in Miss Murphy's mending basket?" Pike had no answer ready. He looked to Lady Murphy. She looked away. Barbara spoke before counsel could. "Your worship, there is more. Yesterday evening Mr. Pike sent this card to Merriford House. 10 o'clock is punctual. Do not make us fetch you." Coupled with planted property and prior coercive marriage demand, I ask the court to treat theft complaint as malicious prosecution intended to compel my return. Anstruther laid down the card. Pike's hand unmistakable beneath the added threat. The magistrate removed his spectacles and polished them slowly, which was worse than shouting. "Mr. Pike, Lady Murphy, do you wish to maintain theft accusation under risk of perjury inquiry and criminal conspiracy review?" Lady Murphy rose, abandoning tears for steel. "I maintain my authority as mother." "Stepmother," Barbara said. Lady Murphy whipped toward her. Ungrateful girl! I clothed you, fed you. You diverted my trust, struck me, and attempted sale of my person to settle debt. The words hung in the chamber, blunt as hammer blows. Penrith set down his spectacles. Enough! Theft charge is stayed pending full investigation. Trust funds remain frozen 48 hours only, after which this court expects formal accounting from Lady Murphy's representatives and trustees. I strongly advise parties to resolve civil restoration before I invite Crown scrutiny of fraud allegations. Not victory yet. A gate opening. No more. In the corridor outside, Pike rounded on Barbara, voice low and venomous. You think this ends me? No, she said. You ended yourself when you mistook fear for consent. He moved as if to step closer. The constable shifted between them before the Duke needed to. 2 days later, in Anstruther's chambers, defeat finally became real enough to sign. Lady Murphy arrived first, rigid in black silk, lips bloodless. Pike came late and smelled faintly of spirits. Each had separate counsel now. Even opportunists quarrel when the ship lists. Anstruther read terms aloud with surgical precision. Restoration of full trust principal and withheld income to Miss Barbara Murphy within 14 days. Public written retraction of allegations of theft and instability to be circulated to named households and posted at pump room notice board. Withdrawal of all marriage claims and complaints. Mr. Pike to issue statement relinquishing any supposed engagement. In return, Miss Murphy suspends immediate criminal filing contingent on complete compliance. Pike slammed his palm on the table. Extortion, Barbara answered before Anstruther could. Restitution. Lady Murphy stared at Barbara as if seeing for the first time someone she could not slap back into place. You would drag your own family into court? You dragged us there already, counsel murmured urgently in Lady Murphy's ear. Calculation, risk, names of magistrates not friendly this week. Pike tried one last adaptation. He turned to the Duke with a crooked smile. Surely your Grace sees this is unnecessary. Marry the girl and settle it privately. Alistair did not even look at him. Miss Murphy speaks for herself. Barbara slid the pen across the table toward Lady Murphy. Sign, she said. The older woman's hand trembled, not with softness, with rage, as she took it. Ink scratched. Pike swore, then signed harder, blotting his own name. When it was done, Anstruther sanded the pages and gathered them away. Lady Murphy rose, chair scraping. At the door she paused and spoke without turning. You always had your father's stubbornness. Barbara's answer was quiet. And his accounts. Lady Murphy left without another word. Pike lingered only long enough to glare at everyone in turn, then limped after her, cane striking like a metronome of thwarted appetite. The room exhaled. Anstruther poured 4 small glasses of sherry with the solemnity of a sacrament. Miss Murphy, he said, handing her one, you have done what most clients only threaten to do, and then faint from. Barbara took the glass. Her hand shook once. She steadied it against the stem. I nearly fainted repeatedly, she said. The dowager, who had sat silent through signatures like a field marshal at surrender, gave a dry snort. Nonsense! You merely looked as if you might bite. That evening, rain had stopped. Bath smelled of wet stone and extinguished tension. Barbara stood alone in Merriford House's back garden, where rosemary bushes held beads of water and the gravel path shone under a thin moon. Her body felt oddly light, as if she had been carrying iron for years and set it down too quickly. She heard steps and did not turn immediately. She knew the cadence now. Alistair came to stand beside her at the low wall. For a while they said nothing. Somewhere beyond a carriage rolled, then faded. It is done, he said at last. It is signed. Barbara corrected. Done will be when funds arrive. A hint of a smile touched his mouth. Fair. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold. I thought I would feel triumph. Instead I feel emptied and furious, and relieved enough to weep if anyone speaks kindly. I can be unkind if it helps preserve composure. It startled a laugh out of her, sudden and real. She covered it with one hand, then dropped the hand and met his eyes. You offered me safety in a lane, she said. You never once asked me to thank you for it. I wanted you alive. Gratitude was not part of the contract. He hesitated, then spoke with visible effort, as if stepping onto unmarked ground. Barbara, there is something I would ask, though you are free to refuse. She stilled. I would marry you, he said, the words plain and unshielded. Now, at once, if you wished it, not as rescue, not as repayment, because I... He broke off, recalibrated. Because I love you and have for some time in the only ways I knew before I understood what to call them. Her breath caught. For one suspended instant, all the easy endings the world preferred for women fluttered at the edge of reach. Choose protection, choose title, choose the nearest harbour before weather turns again. Barbara stepped closer, close enough to see the strain he did not hide. You honour me, she said softly, and if I answered tonight, it would be from exhaustion, relief, and the terror of standing unmoored, not from freedom. I cannot begin our life by exchanging one dependence for another, however honourable the man. Pain flickered across his face, then respect settled over it, like something chosen. Understood. She touched his sleeve, a small, brave gesture. If you still wish to ask when I have built something that is mine, ask then. He covered her hand with his, once, warm and steady. Then I will wait and court you properly. Letters first, calls with witnesses, walks in indisputable daylight, no ambushes in rain unless invited. This time her smile was unguarded. Very proper, Your Grace. Alistair, he said. She tested it, quiet. Alistair. The first public retraction went up at the pump room 3 mornings later, pinned straight under official notice wax. People stopped pretending not to read as they read. Lady Murphy withdraws prior allegations regarding Miss Barbara Murphy. Mr. Selwyn Pike denies any claim of engagement. Matters of property resolved by legal instrument. By noon, 3 different ladies, who had once asked after Barbara's nerves, now asked, with brittle cheer, whether she might recommend a trustworthy writing master for their daughters. She recommended none. Instead, she met with a carpenter in Widcombe and a widow who let a narrow cottage with 2 front windows and a small outbuilding that could be made into a schoolroom if one did not mind plaster dust and optimism. Barbara minded neither. She walked the space with measuring tape and notebook, tapping walls, counting benches, calculating slate costs, stove coal, quills, copybooks. The widow, Mrs. Trent, watched her with cautious curiosity. Most girls want pianoforte and French verbs. Their mammas do, anyway. They may have both, Barbara said, marking a column, and bookkeeping. Household accounts, shop ledgers, interest tables, contracts read before signed. Mrs. Trent barked a laugh. You'll frighten half the fathers. Only the dishonest half. When Barbara moved in, Elsie, the former kitchen maid from Murphy House, now recovered and employed as a laundress nearby, arrived carrying a basket of mended curtains and crying openly at the sight of Barbara hammering a shelf herself. Miss, beg pardon. Mrs. Trent said you'd be here, but I didn't believe... Look at you. Covered in plaster, Barbara said. A distinguished state. Elsie wiped her nose with her wrist. Need help? Yes, Barbara said, if you can sew straight seams and tell me when I am being ridiculous. can do both." They worked until dusk, hanging maps and alphabets, scrubbing ink from a rescued trestle table, setting out 6 mismatched chairs that would, Barbara hoped, soon prove insufficient. Letters came to Merriford House every 3rd day at first, then nearly daily. Alistair wrote as he had promised. No declarations pressed between lines, no assumptions, only candour. He described parliamentary absurdities, books he thought she would argue with, a tenant child's triumphant spelling of barometer, and once, without ornament, "I miss your voice in rooms that used to suit me." Barbara answered from her own desk by schoolroom firelight, ink warming near the kettle. She wrote of enrolment numbers, of a grocer's daughter who could already add faster than her brothers, of fear that visited at night and left by breakfast, of wanting him near and being glad. Still, she had waited. In August he called at the cottage gate in full daylight with a basket of apples and mud on his boots from walking the lower lane because the path was too narrow for carriage dignity. Mrs. Trent, pretending to weed, counted precisely how long they stood talking under the pear tree. In September he asked if he might escort her and 6 pupils to Sydney Gardens for a natural philosophy demonstration. He spent an hour explaining pulleys to girls who adored him for not speaking down to them. In October, after lessons, he found her alone in the schoolroom, sleeves rolled, chalk on her fingers. Rain freckled the windows, but had not yet committed. "May I come in?" he asked from the threshold. "You are in." He smiled faintly and closed the door behind him. The room smelled of slate and beeswax and children. "I have come," he said, "to ask again. Not because you need a protector. You have proved to all of England that you do not. Not because my name can confer what you lack. You lack nothing I can supply. I ask because my life is narrower without you in it, and because with you I am less afraid of being human than correct." Barbara set down the attendance ledger she had been marking. "That is the strangest proposal I have ever heard." "I have practised for weeks and feared it was still too polished." "It is not polished," she said, stepping closer. "It is true." He drew breath. "Will you marry me, Barbara?" She looked around her little room, the ink stains, the patched curtains Elsie had sewn, the arithmetic tables pinned straight by her own hand, then back at the man waiting without entitlement. "Yes," she said, "freely, joyfully, yes." When he kissed her, it was careful for half a second, then not careful at all. They married in late autumn at a small church above the river, with the dowager in plum silk issuing battlefield instructions to florists, Anstruther looking unexpectedly sentimental, and 12 schoolgirls scattering petals with lethal enthusiasm. Elsie cried through the entire service, and afterward informed the Duke that if he made Barbara unhappy, she knew where to find heavy pans. "Noted," Alistair said gravely. At the wedding breakfast, a folded newspaper lay near Barbara's plate. She opened it to find, tucked inside, the final stamped acknowledgement from Murphy's former trustees. Funds transferred in full, with interest and costs. No further claim. She set it aside, untouched, and reached for cake. On the first hard rain of November, the kind that turned lanes into mirrors and made sensible people stay indoors, Barbara stood at the gate of the Merriford estate, in a stout cloak, and looked out at the weather with unmistakable intent. Alistair came up behind her, already gloved for riding. "If you intend to walk in that," he said, "I am honour bound to object weakly." "Object, then." "I object." She lifted her chin toward the stable. "Leave the horse." He studied her, then laughed under his breath, turned and handed the reins to a baffled groom. They stepped through the gate together into the rain. Water-soaked hems ran cold down collars, blurred hedgerows into soft green shadow. Barbara tilted her face up and let it strike clean across skin that no longer burned from anyone's ring. Beside her, Alistair matched her pace without crowding, without leading, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as the lane narrowed. Years ago, another life, another woman. She had walked out of bondage with empty hands and no promise except refusal. Now she walked forward carrying everything she had claimed, her name, her work, her chosen love. The rain fell hard around them, and neither turned back.